Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing a new fantasy releases wrap-up, and the three books we'll be discussing would be Watermoon, The Floating World, and Forgery of Fate. As always, I'll have all of these linked in the description bar down below, as well as timestamps, so that if you're only interested in one particular book, or you'd like to reference back to the information at a future date, then all of that will be easily accessible to you. But jumping straight into it, I'm going to kick it off with Watermoon. Even though this absolutely fell under the umbrella of fantasy, there's something about it that almost felt like magical realism, in that you are looking at fantasy that exists within a section of our own world. And because of that setup, it actually reminded me so much of Spirited Away. It just actually felt like a more adult and mature version of Spirited Away, and the thematic elements certainly were different. But if you are absolutely a huge fan of that story in that movie, then there is a good chance that you will really enjoy this one. I do think that that somewhat sense of detachment, though, that you sometimes have with those sorts of stories where you are almost having this Alice in Wonderland feel, you're following these characters as they're navigating anything that is possible and anything that shows up. Because there is this exploration aspect to the story, I do feel like the thematic elements feel almost like they are existing through the characters as opposed to the characters themselves. You feel really attached to them and the themes you can pull from that. It's almost like the characters are vehicles for the thematic elements. And while I really liked the thematic elements and I liked how vibrant and interesting the world was, I am somebody that is such a character-driven reader, and so I did miss a little bit getting to feel extremely connected to them. I did find them to be likable, and I found that because there is this sort of contemporary setting that then leads into a fantasy story, that the characters, especially one of them, had things about their life that was really prevalent to a lot of what I think people experience. So getting a little bit more into the details of that and also how everything works. You have a character who is one day going to take over her father's pawn shop, but the pawn shop is not what it seems. In fact, most people, when they enter, are actually planning to enter a completely different store. They're actually expecting to enter a restaurant, and the people who need it end up finding themselves in this pawn shop instead. And they don't necessarily trade in typical items. What they do is they make this bargain. If you are experiencing some kind of tremendous pain, there's something that you just can't seem to let go, they will take that for you, and then they will allow you to move on. You can leave the pawn shop and leave that pain behind, leave those regrets behind, and continue on with your life, or you can choose not to and you can go. But at some point, this will all almost feel like a dream. Our character has watched her father run this pawn shop for a while, and now he is getting to a point where he's going to have to then pass it on to her. And there's a lot of rules when it comes to how you interact with the people that come through and how you interact with their regrets that they leave behind, which take the form of these birds. And so our character has experienced a lot of these things, and there are mysteries involving her parents, specifically her mother, who seems to have crossed some of the lines and the rules that were established, and then she faded from existence. She doesn't really know what happened to her, but she just knows that her mother stopped existing at some point. And when she is meant to take over the pawn shop, that morning, she gets up and her father is missing. It seems as though he has decided he's going to finally get more answers involving her mother and her mother's death or disappearance, because it is kind of a mystery. And our character decides, I need to go after him. I need to try and find him. And just before she has the opportunity to do that, somebody comes through the pawn shop doors, and now this person ends up finding themselves captivated by everything that is going on, and they desperately want to help our character, and that is what launches us into this really extravagant fantasy world. And I really can't emphasize enough, if you like Spirited Away and you like the almost nonsensical nature of the world building in that, then I think that you will really like the world building of this. You just never know what's going to happen next with the world. And I also want to add that when it comes to the other character, the one that enters the pawn shop, this character, I actually really liked the way that the development transpired with them, and the way that we are dissecting specifically this feeling of being abandoned by a parent, and how you continuously live your life almost trying to prove to them that they should regret that decision, even though they're not in your life and they're not there and they're not present. You can't help but kind of consistently do everything because of them, in a way trying to get back at them. So your success is always also a weapon with which to use as this sort of revenge. but also that person's not even in your life. So you're living your life for somebody that's not there. And the dissecting of that for that character, I thought was very well done. I wish a little bit that I had connected more, though, to these characters. And this, I think, is going to be so different from person to person, because some people just really, if the themes are ones that they find themselves attached to, then it won't matter for them whether they're extremely connected to the characters or not. I do think if you are not a fan of the sort of somewhat nonsensical world building, and when I say nonsensical, I should clarify that I'm not trying to say it's not inspired by folklore or that there wasn't thought put into it by any means. It's just you as the reader feel like you're just so many twists and turns, and all of a sudden you're here, and then this happens, and then now you go to this place, and then also these things, you can travel through this, and then you can end up on this place. It's just one thing after the next. You kind of tumble through this fantasy world where it genuinely feels like anything is possible. However, that is not everybody's preferred kind of setting. Some people want it to be a more established world. Some people want the characters to already be familiar with that world, and it's this, the discovery aspect is not necessarily because every time you turn the page something bizarre is happening, but rather you are trying to get your feet on the ground, and that's the aspect of discovery that you enjoy. If that's more of you, I don't know if this is the book for you. If you're not necessarily a reader who likes the sort of hybrid literary contemporary fantasy type of story, and you prefer epic fantasy, or if you're really, really in love with, fantasy romance where that is the motivating factor, then this might be not be the story for you. But if you like this sort of Alice in Wonderland, Spirited Away type of story, and you like the idea of the themes that I was touching on, then I think there's a chance that you could really, really enjoy this one. From there, we have The Floating World, and this one was one that I was very much anticipating, as within the comp titles, Final Fantasy was mentioned, and I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan, and I definitely see the parallels in the world building. You have a society where there is this sort of floating world, and there are these beings that are attached to the lore as to who sort of started this area and who was in power in the past, their role within society. And absolutely, people have taken this lore and these almost religious beliefs, and they have shaped it so that they can gain power, that they can put certain people in their place, and that they could use individuals as pawns for their own schemes. And you have two main perspectives, and then a third that kind of enters the picture here and there. The third one is the one that sort of represents some of the other ways that sort of these oppressive groups use all the things I was just describing. But the other two perspectives are much more personal. One of them is somebody who has an adoptive family, and they just like to go around and tell stories. They really love their job, they love the sort of traveling lifestyle, and they love each other very deeply. But then one day they are attacked by these demons, or this particular one demon that is so powerful that it ends up harming so many of them, and that includes the people that our main character loves, these people that are essentially her family. And in an effort to try and find a cure for whatever the demon did to what is like this uncle brother type figure to her, in order to try and heal him, she goes on this quest to see if she can do something and save him before it's too late. But in leaving the safety, not only the emotional safety of her family, but also this very real safety that they provided her, by leaving them, she is suddenly finding herself very much in danger because she has some kind of power that she's been trying to suppress. You have some curiosity about the origins of that and why they want her to keep her powers a secret, and you wonder how she's connected to some of the greater political things that have happened. Is she connected to the lore in some fashion? And then on her journey, she ends up crossing paths with our other main perspective. And he is somebody who seems to not recall his life before. He has memories that go back a couple years, but everything before that is really, really hazy, if he basically remembers anything at all. He has these bits and pieces, and one of the only things he remembers is that he has a brother. Also is somewhat filled with kind of this quiet disdain toward a lot of the people in power. However, he also wants answers, and one of the things that the people in power want is this mysterious girl who showed certain powers, and they are trying to track this girl down, so he is now searching for our other character. I really thought that the world building was a lot of fun. I liked both of these characters, and I really appreciated the way that you had it established who matters to them, because I am a sucker for somebody who the characters are motivated because they love their family. And we talk about all the time as kind of a joke in fantasy stories, especially with young characters, that they just sort of exist and there's not really people in their lives that shape them. And sometimes they very conveniently can just do whatever they want and they have no attachments to anybody, which can feel kind of empty because it doesn't feel real. And when I say convenient, I mean it's convenient for the sake of any new person they're introduced to, they can just invest everything in them, or they can invest everything in whatever plot they have going on, and they don't have to consider the people in their lives. They don't have to consider the obligations, or that's probably a more negative way to put it, but they don't have to shoulder the responsibility of when you really love somebody and you want to ensure that they're safe and that you care about them and that you don't want anything bad to happen to them. You have so many characters that they don't have that going on. They just can just go wherever they want to go and do whatever they want to do. So you have these characters that are motivated by the love of their family, as noted. One who wants to save an injured family member, and the other one who wants to find their way back to a family member. So I really liked their motivations. I liked their interactions with each other. Some of it was a little tropey and things we've seen before, but I wasn't too upset about it because I still felt like the way that their feelings progressed throughout the story was kind of actually on the sweeter side. It's refreshing to have characters that are just like kind of nice to each other after there's so many books out there now where it's like they're enemies to lovers and they're just like really rude, to put it politely. They're just really rude to each other all the time and you're like, nobody talks like this though. Is this banter or are these people just incapable of having a normal conversation? So it was nice to get to see people that had normal conversations and felt like they genuinely respected each other, and I just liked the way that everything progressed. I did find myself, though, because some aspects of it were somewhat familiar, it wasn't necessarily a standout book for me. It's not like I was wowed by the world building or wowed by the characters or, oh my gosh, I've never seen characters interact in this way. There was nothing necessarily that took me aback because it was unique, but I don't know that I necessarily needed that for this story. I just found myself having a good time, enjoying it. I believe the sequel is going to be released this year as well, so if you do want to pick it up and it sounds good, but maybe typically you're somebody who's like, I prefer to wait till they're all out. It's going to be out, I think, October, so you don't have to wait very long. So this could be a good new fantasy release to check out if it sounds good to you. And then last for today, we have A Forgery of Fate. And for me, I saved the best for last. This was my favorite of these three. And just in general, this was probably one of my favorite things I've picked up as of late, just because it was so much fun and there was so much life to this story. I think that this author is very gifted at writing spunky characters that are fun and they feel flawed and youthful, but they don't, for me anyway, go into that territory of just being like caricatures or over the top and super obnoxious. They have qualities to them that sometimes kind of brush up against the descriptor of annoying, but never so much so that you despise them, or at least not for me. I just always find that they are likable and lovable and fun, and yes, sometimes that means they start to lean into being a little bit over the top occasionally, but just little sprinkles, just little doses. And I like characters like that because I find a lot of people are afraid to write characters like that. I think a lot of times, I'll get to what the point, like what the plot of the story is and everything in just a second, but because there's so much life in these characters, I want to highlight this for a moment. But I feel like we're oftentimes finding characters that are very brooding, or we have, oh my gosh, I know many of us are very bored of the lady who has like a chip on her shoulder, and then you have the bad boy character, and there's just certain characters that are, I don't want to go as far as say they're easier to write, because that's not necessarily true. It actually is really difficult, I think, to make a character like that actually stand out these days because there's so much of it. So it's not that it's easy, it's just very familiar, and in the landscape of what marketing is currently for books, where it's a lot of just trying to throw out tropes and try to be like, sunshine grump and good girl bad boy. You know, when you've got these defining qualities, sometimes it feels like you're writing these characters to fit that rather than that can be applied to them, but it's not necessarily all they are. And regardless, I feel like we have these certain character types that are relatively familiar to us and that get written more often. It feels like sometimes authors are scared to write the fun, joyful, mischievous characters because there's something that appeals to us about the brooding characters or the angry characters. So I just really had fun with the main perspective of this story, True. She was, I thought, very, very lovable. But now for the story and the stakes and the world, because all those things I thought were fantastic. So the setup for the story is that you follow this young lady, this teenage girl who is the eldest of 3 sisters, and she loves her family. She loves her parents, and her father is an adventurer. He goes out on this ship, and sometimes he's gone for long periods of time, but he just fills her world with wonder and stories, and he's a loving father. He loves his wife, he loves his daughters, and he's so sweet. And he really instills in her this sense of imagination. He gives her this paintbrush, and he really encourages her to embrace her imagination, not just for these things that she comes up with in her mind, but actually to apply that to painting. And she really takes this to heart. And one day, her father does not come back from a voyage, and it ends up stripping their entire family of everything because the mother, in her attempts to find out more about her husband, about what happened to him, she also leans into some of her not as good qualities, and that involves gambling and just trying to have quick fixes, and it ends up really putting the 3 daughters and the mother all in not good circumstances. They are now quite desperate, and the oldest daughter feels now like it falls on her to try and look out for her mother and her sisters. I really think that this is a well-established pattern for this author to have characters who have, and I was just complimenting the floating world for this, but I really, really loved how it was done in A Forgery of Fate, and also just in general, this author's other works. I really feel like she establishes so well the familial bonds, and also showing people as flawed individuals. I talked about how this character's personality was really fun, but the mother, her falling back on these things that she does that lead them to these negative circumstances, it's not seen as like, isn't she rotten and stupid? It's not like that whatsoever. It's just like showing the ways that people can fall on hard times, and how when you're desperate, your worst qualities, you cannot hide them, and they often lead you to sort of spiral into something worse, and that they had the luxury of not having to really be introspective about that and interrogate those things, because before they were in a position of relative privilege. But then when you lose that, suddenly all your worst qualities, it's like there's a light shining on them, and your best qualities get overlooked because now you're just seen as a street rat, or you're just seen as poor, or you're just seen as less than, you don't try hard enough. And there are people that the mother has debts to that want to come calling, and there's just a lot of stakes established early, but also a love of her family and how much this character cares so much about trying to do what she can. Also, I really loved the way that her and her sisters kind of grow through the difficulties. One sister in particular who she didn't used to get along with, now they're kind of like, we're in this together, which I really, really loved. The way that the story kind of kicks off and becomes a lot more fantastical is that in her painting efforts, our character finds herself suddenly having her life cross paths with some beings from the underwater dragon kingdom. And I don't want to say too much about how all those things transpire, but she finds herself now in an attempt to not only save her family from the situation that they're finding themselves in, but also to maybe find out more about what happened to her father. She embarks on this journey through this underwater kingdom, and alongside her, and the way that she has to get to this kingdom is through a betrothal to a half-human, half-dragon prince. And so then there's this mysterious figure where you don't really understand his motivations or why he feels like she's so important, but it clearly has something to do with her painting skills and the magic that perhaps she has with her ability to paint. And I loved the underwater world so much. It was just so vibrant and beautiful and dark and sinister, but it was just such a fun fantasy setting to explore. And if you have read Elizabeth Lim's other works, one thing that I know that other people felt about specifically the second book, I believe it's called A Dragon's Promise, the second book in the Six Crimson Cranes duology, is that there were hints of this underwater dragon kingdom, but it didn't feel like we actually spent very much time there, and some people were like, oh, I was really looking forward to that. You do spend a lot of time there, so if that was something you were wanting out of that other duology, you're going to get that with A Forgery of Fate. I had so much fun with this one. I thought it was delightful, such a breath of fresh air, just adventurous story, and I am really excited to see what Elizabeth Lim does next, because I definitely think this is an I prefer to say auto interest author, where no matter what they put out moving forward, I am intrigued and interested. At the very least, I plan on checking it out. The phrase is typically auto buy, if you don't know what I'm referring to, but I'm certainly finding that this is an auto interest author. I have yet to be disappointed in the adventurous elements to her works. But that's it for some new fantasy releases. If you have thoughts on any of these books, feel free to leave those in the description bar down below. If you have any books that you think people would like based off of these books, then feel free to give those recommendations. If you're interested in any of them, I'll have them linked. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.